Chapter 40. They Might Be Giants. Traveling along the King's Road was far easier than venturing off the beaten track. The gift itself was remarkable and so underutilized. The land was rich and fertile, with more than enough trees to build homes and villages. The sheer number of rivers, lakes, and streams scattered across the landscape made water a non-issue. Yet, the place was deserted, almost devoid of people. There was plenty of life, as Ghost had proven since they set off from Castle Black. The White Wolf thrived in this environment, roaming freely ahead during the day. Every so often, Jon would take a moment to warg into Ghost. Each time, he found that familiar door wide open and welcoming, inviting him in. Seeing through the wolf's eyes was almost indescribable. He could see farther and make out details more clearly. When combined with Ghost's other senses, Jon's own felt inadequate. Sense would rise, and with practice, he could differentiate between them: man, woman, horse, deer, rabbit, mouse. He could pinpoint each with ease. Right now, Ghost was stalking a deer that remained blissfully unaware of the danger it was in. Jon decided to break off their connection. He had discovered that when Ghost fed while they were linked, he could taste the meal too, and he really disliked the taste of blood. "Where is he?" Jojen asked. "He's a few miles ahead of us." "He's caught a deer," Jon replied. "Is the connection with him still as easy?" "Aye. With the others, it takes a little while, but with Ghost, it's instant." "It's like he's waiting for me," Jon said, smiling. It didn't take them long to reach the evidence of Ghost's kill. The deer carcass had been stripped, and lying to one side was the not-so-white wolf, looking quite pleased with himself. Fortunately, they had passed a stream about a mile back. Jon glanced at the wolf, who seemed reluctant to follow, before turning his horse toward the stream. After a moment, the hesitant wolf moved, and they set off. "We shouldn't be long, my lord," Jon assured. "Over there," Jon said to Jaime, pointing towards the stream and the wolf. Jaime nodded in understanding. Loras rode up beside him, and together with their guards, they set off. The ride to the stream took just a few moments, but once they arrived, it took Jon much longer to coax the wolf into the water. They were not far from where the Mormonts would split off from their party to head to Bear Island, a parting Jon dreaded. Jaime, however, seemed happier than ever since leaving Castle Black. He and Daisy had grown closer, more open with their affections. The looming goodbye, even if only temporary, had shifted their moods over the past day or two. It would be more than a moon before they saw each other again, and Jon worried that Jaime's spirits would falter without Daisy by his side. Still, considering they would be wed by the time they reunited, perhaps Jaime would handle the separation better than Jon anticipated. Jon was pulled from his thoughts by the sound of splashing water. He turned just in time to see Ghost jump excitedly, a large salmon clamped in his jaws. "Really? A deer wasn't enough for you?" he said, earning laughter from Loras and the guards. "It would seem not," Loras quipped, and they watched as Ghost devoured the sizable fish. Once he was finished, they hurried back to the others, not wanting to fall too far behind. They caught up just in time, as the group had indeed reached the point where they would split off. Riding alongside the others, Jon and Loras dismounted and walked over to say their farewells to Daisy and her sisters, and for a little while longer to Yora and Linnes. "My lady, my lord," Jon greeted Yora. "Ah, Jon. We thought we might not get the chance to bid you farewell," Yora replied. "It's been a pleasure traveling with you, my lord, my lady." "I look forward to seeing you again soon," Jon said warmly. "Aye, you too, lad. Bear Island is most grateful for what you've done for us," Yora responded. "I hope you visit one day," Yora said. "I shall, my lord," Jon replied, turning to Linnes. "My lady, I wish you all the best health for you and the babe." "Thank you, Jon, for everything," Linnes said. Jon watched as she said her goodbyes to Loras, giving her nephew a large hug and musing his hair, which made them both giggle. He then said his own farewells to Lyra and Jory, who both urged him to come visit Bear Island and promised to see him in Winterfell. He noticed Jaime and Dacey exchanging their own goodbyes and turned away to give them some privacy. Once they were finished, Dacey approached him and whispered in his ear, "Look after him, will you?" "I will, my lady, always," Jon replied, and she smiled at him before mounting her horse. He did the same as soon as Jaime did. Jon considered going over to speak to Jaime but decided against it. He could tell by the look Jaime was giving Dacey that he didn't want comfort from anyone but her right now. They lingered for a few more minutes, watching the Mormonts and their guards depart before turning to head in the opposite direction. According to Small Jon, they were no more than a day away from Last Hearth and should reach it by the next day. Saying goodbye to Dacey had been difficult for Jaime. If their separation had been longer than a moon, he wasn't sure he would have been able to bear it. From the moment she had agreed to be his wife, he found himself looking forward to his days just a little bit more, and cherishing her company a little more. Finding Jon had given him purpose, but finding Dacey had brought him happiness. For the first time in his life, it felt as if both sides of his heart were truly beating. The man he had always wanted to be, a Kingsguard, a knight, honorable, had seemed long dead and buried before meeting Jon. But though buried deep inside him, that man was not dead. He was waiting to be reborn, and it was his king who had made that happen. The man he never thought he could become, the one with a wife who loved him as much as he loved her, had seemed like a ghost from the past. He had believed that version of himself was long gone, only to discover that it was very much alive. Years earlier, he had said goodbye to a woman he thought he loved. He had ridden off, convinced he understood what it meant to leave a piece of his heart behind. How wrong he had been. Saying goodbye to Cersei was nothing like this. Moments after parting with her, he had forgotten her entirely, caught up in the excitement of the adventure ahead. But saying goodbye to Dacey was different. "It will only be a moon or so, Jaime, and then we'll be wed," Dacey said softly. "What if I can't go a moon without you?" Jaime replied, a small smirk on his lips, though there was truth in his words. "Then, my lord, we are done for," Dacey said, kissing him gently. "I love you." "I love you too." As he turned to his side, he noticed Ghost had joined him, which prompted Small Jon to ride off elsewhere. With a laugh, Jaime nodded to the wolf, and they continued on their way. After riding through a dense forest, they arrived at the Umber homestead. Last Hearth loomed atop a small mountain, accessible only by a winding path that led to the keep itself. As he gazed at it in the distance, he admired its formidable position. This keep wouldn't fall easily, certainly not by surprise. "My lord," Jon called as he rode up alongside Loras. "Jon, Loras," Jaime replied. "That path looks tricky," Loras remarked. "Not really," Jon said, gesturing toward Ghost, who was racing ahead of them. "Well, we better not keep Lord Umber waiting," Jaime said, and they set off toward the path. Loras was right, it was tricky. Some parts were slick, and while the trail was wide enough for horses to ride four abreast, they quickly discovered that the edges were too dangerous, forcing them to ride single file. The Small Jon and the Umber men seemed unfazed as they rode on as usual, with Ghost leading the way. Jaime had no issues with the path as they rode on. However, when they finally reached the keep, his impression was far from positive. Last Hearth, though old and sturdy, was probably the least welcoming place he had ever encountered, even less so than Castle Black. The walls were dark gray, blanketed in snow and ice. The massive doors, though imposing, were made of dark wood that only added to the overall bleakness of the keep. It looked cold, and seeing the three large men waiting to greet them, all dressed in thick furs, Jaime knew it would be. As for the Umbers themselves, the Great Jon was an absolute beast of a man. Although he wasn't much taller than his son, in sheer size, he was far bigger. The other two men were equally imposing. One wore an eye patch and a white bear cloak, complete with the bear's head as the hood. The other man was thinner and more gaunt, sporting a snowy white beard and dark eyes. Jaime glanced at the large lord, who regarded him with distrust, then back to Jon, who seemed uneasy about the Greyjohn's expression. Jon smiled and dismounted, quickly joined by Loras and Ghost, who caused quite a stir among the Umbers. "Is that, it can't be, a dire wolf?" Greatjon exclaimed loudly. "Aye, father, that's Jon's wolf," Jon replied. "Snow, come here, lad, let me look at you," Greatjon said as Jon stepped forward. "Aye, a Stark true and true. Be welcome at last hearth, lad," Greatjon said, a broad smile spreading across his face. "I thank you, my lord. May I introduce Lord Jaime Lannister?" Jon said, and Jaime moved forward. "Lord Umber, I thank you for your hospitality," Jaime said. "Aye, welcome, Lord Lannister," Greatjon replied, his greeting much less warm than before. "Lord Loras Tyrell," Jon continued, and Greatjon turned to greet Loras with a similarly cool welcome. "Lord Jojen and Lady Mira Reed," Jon introduced the Reed children, and they received the same reception as Jon had. "I know your father well." "A fine man," Greatjon boomed happily. "Thank you, my lord," Jojen replied, his voice steady. A woman emerged from the shadows, carrying a tray adorned with bread and salt. Jaime smirked to himself, thinking that at least he wouldn't be murdered here. He took a piece of each. "Well, come on. We'll show you to your rooms, and we'll feast tonight, Lord Jaime, Lord Snow," Greatjon Umber said before he and the rest of the Umbers quickly retreated inside. While the interior was still far from comforting, it was significantly warmer than the biting cold outside. They were escorted to some decent rooms, and Jaime was pleased to find that his had a fire already roaring in the hearth. Jon and Loras joined him after dropping off their chests in their own rooms. They would only be staying here for a day or so, all eager to continue their journey to Winterfell. "Not exactly friendly, is he?" Loras remarked. "No, this is the north, Loras. They don't think highly of Southerners," Jon replied. "The Mormonts weren't like that." "Even Small Jon was far friendlier," Loras countered, and Jaime chuckled. "Aye, they know us, Loras. The Northmen don't trust what they don't know. Isn't that right, Jon?" "It is, my lord. Which is why I was wondering if I should speak to Greatjon myself." "Why's that?" Jaime asked. "I think the trade deal will go better coming from me." "It was the same with the Manderlys, my lord." "Very well. You know the details better than I do anyway," Jaime said, eliciting a laugh from the group. "That's because you only like playing with your sword, my lord," Jon joked. "Why you? Who said that?" Jaime exclaimed in mock outrage. "Three guesses," Jon replied. "It was my aunt, wasn't it?" Jaime asked. "Aye, my lord," Jon confirmed, and this time, they all shared a light laugh. "Loras had better get some rest, don't you think, my lord?" "I'm not tired," Loras grumbled. "Loras, you're about to endure a proper northern feast." "Trust me, you will be," Jaime said, causing Jon to laugh loudly. As they walked through the Umber Keep, Jon discovered that having a large white dire wolf by his side was a good way to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed. Jon felt a surge of frustration. The servant steered clear of him, and the guard stepped aside, allowing him to walk freely toward what he assumed was the Greyjohn's solar. The shouts echoing from within confirmed he had found the right place. "What were you thinking, boy?" the Greyjohn's voice boomed. "I was thinking that the trade deal we were being offered was too good to turn down," Jon replied. "You think I care about coin?" "I think we could use the damn thing," Jon shot back. "Not enough to get in bed with the Kingslayer, we can't. He's a good man, father. He's marrying Maege Mormont. What other Southerner do you think would do that? I don't know or care what the Mormonts are thinking. I'm sure Maege will have something to say about it. But you brought the Kingslayer to my home, boy. That was enough for Jon. He moved toward the door, but the guard attempted to stop him. Just then, Ghost knocked the guard off his feet. Jon pushed the door open, surprising the men inside. "Snow, what are you doing?" the great Jon shouted as he stood up. "How dare you, my lord? You speak of a man you know nothing about, a man who has done more for the North than any Southerner ever has. Where is the honor in speaking of a guest in such a manner? You're talking about the Kingslayer, Snow. It's not your place." "Not my place. My lord, I know the man better than any of you here. I know how much he's helped the North, how much he's done for it. He comes here to offer his help to you, and your stubborn pride blinds you to old prejudices. He broke his oath, Snow. An oath to a mad king, my lord, a mad king who, I may remind you, killed my grandfather and uncle. Your liege lord and his heir. Or have you forgotten, my lord?" "I have not forgotten. I will never forget. Yet the man who brought justice to my family for their deaths is treated with such disrespect. I will not stand for it, my lord. My companions and I shall take our leave. I have no desire to share a hall with you, my lord, not after this." Jon turned and walked away, leaving the men in stunned silence. He stormed back to his room and slammed the door behind him. Ghost stood beside him, brushing against his leg, but even the comforting touch of his wolf's fur couldn't calm the rage bubbling inside Jon. Jaime deserved not just their respect, but their gratitude. Yet, they were too closed-minded to see it. Men like the great Jon weren't fit to carry Jaime's sword. As Jon shoved the clothes he'd taken from the chest back inside, Loras entered the room. Noticing his friend's distress, he quickly approached Jon, who still hadn't calmed down. "Jon, what's wrong?" Loras asked, concern etched on his face. "These men, these foolish men. It's no wonder the North is thought so poorly of in the South. It's full of closed-minded fools." "What happened?" Loras pressed. "They disrespected Jaime. These fools, who aren't worth even a fraction of him, disrespected a far better man than any of them could ever dream of being," Jon replied, his voice laced with anger. "Jon, you knew they would. Isn't that why you went to speak to them yourself?" It is," Jon admitted, sitting down resignedly. "But Loras, how did you leave it?" Loras asked. "I told them we were leaving." "Jon, we can't. It's getting late, it'll be dark soon. We have to stay." I know, Jon said, shaking his head. "Wait here," Loras instructed, and Jon nodded as Loras left the room. Sitting on the bed, Jon felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. Had he overreacted? Had he gone too far? The rage he felt when he heard them speak of Jaime that way had been intense, but was he right to feel it? Would it have been better to show a different side, to stay calm and persuade them? He wasn't sure what the right thing to do was. Standing up for Jaime felt right, of that he was certain, but perhaps he should have approached it differently. A few minutes later, Loras returned with Jaime, and Jon couldn't meet his gaze. Jon felt the weight of disappointment pressing down on him. Jaime sat on the bed beside him, offering silent comfort with an arm around his shoulder. Jon closed his eyes, fighting back tears. He didn't want to cry in front of Loras and Jaime, not for this, not now. "You know I'm supposed to be the impulsive one with a temper, right?" Jaime said with a laugh. Well, I did learn from you after all," Jon replied, a hint of laughter escaping him. "You think we should leave?" Jaime asked. "No, Loras was right. We have to stay. We can leave tomorrow." "Fine, I'll go talk to the great Jon." "My lord?" Jon questioned. "It's fine, Jon. Leave it to me," Jaime reassured him, and Loras nodded in agreement. Jon watched as Loras and Jaime left the room, then lay back on the bed. He was supposed to be the one smoothing things over in the North, yet he'd made everything worse. Now Jaime and Loras would have to apologize for his outburst and hope the Great Jon would allow them to stay. Everything he had said to the Great Jon had been justified, yet he felt foolish for not considering the consequences of his momentary loss of control. Loras had been surprised to see Jon so angry. He had never witnessed his friend like that before. But it was no wonder. It had been Lord Jaime who triggered Jon's temper. In many ways, Jon and Loras were alike, especially when it came to the people they cared about. Loras understood that Jon's bond with Jaime was even closer than his own with the Lord. He wondered if it was wise to leave Jon alone in his room, but Jaime had reassured him, so they were now on their way to meet Lord Umber. Loras felt uncertain about what to expect from the Lord of Last Hearth. All Jon had told him was that the Great Jon was a typical Northman. When he had asked Jojen and Mira what that meant, he was left with more questions than answers. As they entered the Solar, Jaime and Loras were met with two guards who exchanged odd looks before checking behind them. Moments later, they were ushered in to see Lord Umber. "My lord," Jaime greeted. "Lord Jaime," the Great Jon replied. "I believe I owe you an apology, my lord," Jaime said. "My lord?" The Great Jon glanced at them both, then shifted his gaze to his son and the other man with the beard they had encountered earlier, whom he remembered as Hothar. "For my squire's behavior," Jaime clarified. "No, my lord, you do not." Jon Snow spoke truly. Although his words were harsh, he was right to do so, the Great Jon stated, surprising Jaime. "My lord, I don't understand," Jaime replied. "I spoke out of turn, Lord Jaime." The lad corrected me, fiercely, I may add, the Great Jon said, a smile spreading across his face. "According to my son, his wolf is just as fierce." He let out a hearty laugh. "Aye, that is true, my lord," Jaime chuckled. "I congratulate you on your upcoming wedding. Lady Dacey is a fine woman." "That she is, my lord," Jaime said, grinning, which in turn made the Great Jon smile as well. "We shall feast tonight, my lord, to celebrate your upcoming wedding and our new trade deal." "We shall," Jaime agreed, and the Great Jon nodded to a guard, who soon returned with a woman carrying some ale. "To the Lannisters and the Umbers," the Great Jon declared, raising his mug. "The Umbers and the Lannisters," Jaime echoed, and the Great Jon laughed as they both hurried to down their drinks, managing to finish within moments of each other. After sharing another mug of ale and reminiscing about a tournament Jaime had won, the two men left the room. As they walked down the corridor towards their own quarters, Loras walked silently beside Jaime, who occasionally shook his head or chuckled softly. When they finally reached Jon's room, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Loras checked in on Jon and found him asleep. He and Jaime walked back to Jaime's room, and once inside, Loras could no longer contain his curiosity. "What just happened, my lord?" Loras asked. "Northmen, Loras. They're a different breed, don't ever forget that," Jaime replied. "Aye, my lord, I know, but I don't understand." Jon standing up to the Great Jon actually impressed him. It was almost as if the man had been waiting for Jon to do just that, Jaime explained. "You're right, my lord. Northmen are odd," Loras admitted, and Jaime let out a hearty laugh. "Now go get some rest." Jon was right earlier, a northern feast is much different. Loras did as instructed and returned to his room, though he wasn't tired at all. Instead, he lay on his bed, simply waiting. Eventually, he dozed off for an hour or two until he was stirred awake by a knock on his door. He got up and opened it to find a serving girl standing there with a jug of water and some towels. He quickly took the items and washed up to prepare for the upcoming feast. As he was getting ready, Jon knocked and then entered. "Are you all right?" Loras asked. "Aye, Loras, I am. Jaime told me what happened with the Great Jon," Jon replied. "I got lucky," Jon said modestly. "Well, sometimes it's good to be lucky, is it not? Loras smirked as he finished getting ready. Come on, we'll need to find a nice umber lass for you to dance with, Jon joked, but Loras shook his head. You're the dancer, Jon. I'll sit and watch. Once they were ready, they left the room and headed to meet up with Mira, Jojen, and Jaime. They found the two Reeds already waiting but had to wait a little longer for Jaime. When he finally arrived, all 5 of them followed a servant down to the main hall, where the feast had already begun. It seemed the Umbers didn't care much for ceremony, which Loras found refreshing. He always thought the introductions at these events dragged on too long. The feasts themselves lasted as long as the laughter and joy they brought. They were escorted to their respective tables. Jaime sat at the Umber High table, while Jon, along with the Reeds, settled at the one directly below. At their table were a couple of younger boys and a girl about Mira's age. As they took their seats, the feast commenced in earnest, and introductions began. The Greatjon's voice boomed through the hall. Quiet, he commanded, and the noise fell to a hush. That's better. Now, if I may introduce our guests for this feast, Lord Jaime Lannister, the Warden of the West and a friend of the Umbers. Mugs banged on the tables, and Jon looked surprised at the enthusiastic welcome. Jon Snow, son of our liege lord and friend of the Umbers, the great Jon continued, gesturing for Jon to stand. Lord Loras Tyrell, friend of the Umbers. Lord Jojen Reed, Lady Mira Reed, friends of the Umbers, he added, and the clamor grew louder. I bid you all welcome to Last Hearth and offer you meat, mead, and a warm place to stay should the need arise. My lords, my lady, the Umbers wish you well. The hall erupted in cheers. Jon appeared almost as shocked as Loras felt. They had smoothed things over with the great Jon earlier, but Loras hadn't expected such a warm welcome. He couldn't help but smile at the look on Jon's face, though that smile soon faded when the girl sitting to Loras's right began her introductions. May I introduce my brothers and myself? I am Liara Umber, and these are my brothers, Hoarfrost and Brandon. She smiled, and Loras returned it as best he could. Her brothers looked even younger than Jon, yet they were already of similar size. Liara, on the other hand, towered over Loras, her build heavier than either his or Jon's. Despite her imposing presence, Loras found her company far different from what he was used to in the south. The ladies danced with enthusiasm, and though Jaime eventually joined one of them, it was surprisingly enjoyable. She seemed completely uninterested in him, and instead, her attention was drawn to Jojen, much to Mira's delight. Jaime had learned early on that Lord Umber enjoyed his ale. If their earlier meeting hadn't made that clear, sitting at the feasting table with him certainly did. Jaime had barely finished 1 drink, while the man had downed at least 3. Just as Umber was reaching for a 4th, his son stood up and called for Jon. Jon, come here, the small Jon shouted, remaining standing as Jon approached the table, a look of apprehension on his face. My lord? Jon asked as he arrived. These fools don't believe me about the ice, Jon, the small Jon snickered. A foolish idea, Snow. Who would want ice and why? Morse chimed in, his eye patch replaced with what appeared to be a shiny black stone. Can you get me some ice, my lord? Jon asked, glancing at the curious Great Jon. Ice we have plenty of, Snow, the Great Jon replied, sending a servant to fetch a chunk of ice. Meanwhile, the feast continued around them, but Jaime noticed several eyes were drawn to the high table. Jon stood there, waiting, and within moments, the servant returned, carrying a large chunk of ice that he placed on the table. See? Worthless, the Great Jon remarked, both he and the small Jon smirking. Jon pulled out a small knife and began to chip away at the ice, knocking off small pieces. When he was satisfied, he reached for an empty mug, placed the ice inside, and then asked for, and received, a jug of ale, which he poured over the ice. My lord, drink slowly, Jon cautioned. The room erupted in laughter, the Greatjon's booming voice rising above the rest. It's a hard task you're setting me, lad, but I'll try. Jaime watched as the Great Jon took a small, unsure sip of the ale before taking a larger gulp. A smile spread across the man's face as he savored the drink. Jon held the mug almost reverently in his hand. You need to try this, he said loudly as he chipped away at more ice and filled additional mugs. Soon, more and more people were asking for ice to be added to their drinks. The servants were sent scurrying off to fetch more, and others began chipping the ice themselves and adding it to their drinks. A few minutes later, the Great Jon shouted, "My head! My head, it hurts!" His son, the Small Jon, doubled over in laughter. "He told you to drink slowly, father," Small Jon exclaimed, earning loud cheers from the crowd. Once the pain in the Great Jon's head subsided, Jon was asked to explain more about the ice trade and its potential benefits for the North. He noticed the Great Jon's eyes light up when he mentioned that he had figured out how to move the ice, a trick he had demonstrated while they were at Castle Black. The rest of the night passed without incident until Ghost made an unexpected appearance. Jon had no idea where the wolf had been or how it managed to slip into the hall unnoticed. But the almost woman-like scream from the Great Jon when Ghost's head suddenly appeared from behind him, snatching a leg of chicken from his plate, was something Jon would smile about for a long time. He quickly grabbed the wolf, though it seemed the leg of chicken was the price for Ghost's cooperation, much to the Great Jon's annoyance. As Jon bid his good nights, Loras and the Reeds soon followed suit. If Jaime had been foolish, he might have expected that to signal the winding down of the feast. However, that was far from the case in the north. Instead, the atmosphere intensified. The Great Jon even sang, and Jaime was stunned to discover that the man had a surprisingly good voice, particularly when it came to sad songs. His last memory of the night was an argument between the Great Jon and his son that escalated into a wrestling match in the middle of the floor, both men stripping off their shirts. Who won, Jaime would never know, as he woke up half-dressed, lying on his. The next morning, Jaime could hardly remember much of the previous night. He dressed, washed up, and staggered to the hall for breakfast, only to find others in a similar state. The Great Jon, however, was as loud and boisterous as ever. "Ah, good of you to join us, Lord Jaime," he called out. "Good morning, my lord," Jaime replied, trying to shake off the remnants of his confusion. As the morning conversation buzzed around him, Jaime struggled to keep up. He caught snippets of Jon discussing the ice trade and thought he heard something about the Bay of Seals, but beyond that, it all blurred together. After they finished eating, the group quickly began their preparations to leave. Winterfell was at least 2 weeks away, and they wanted to travel as efficiently as possible. Without the extra supplies and carts, they were able to move faster, though they still took regular breaks to rest. "I bid you all safe travels," the Great Jon said as they lined up to say their goodbyes. "I wish I could accompany you to Winterfell, but I have matters to attend to here. However, I will do my best to ensure that either I or my son arrives in time for your wedding." "I thank you, Lord Umber, for your welcome and hospitality," Jaime responded. "I look forward to our business together." "I, too, my lord," the Great Jon replied. "Jon Snow, it was good to meet you, lad, though I dare not say the same about the White Wolf." Both the Great Jon and the Small Jon cast wary glances at Ghost, who seemed to ignore them completely. "I thank you, my lord, and I apologize for my words," Jon said, and the Great Jon simply smiled. "You're a wolf, Jon." "Wolves don't apologize," he said, giving Jon a hearty slap on the back. "Now be off with you all. You should reach the King's Road before the snow hits." As it turned out, they barely made it. Once back on the King's Road, they quickly found a shaded spot to set up camp for the night, hoping to avoid the impending snowstorm. The storm lasted for 2 days, forcing them to stay where they had camped, and they were grateful they had chosen such a sheltered location. Jon found himself lost in thought as he traveled along the road, feeling the monotony of their daily routine. Each morning began the same way. They would rise early to break their fast, travel until lunchtime, and stop for a quick meal before settling down to camp for the night. Some days, they were fortunate enough to find a suitable campsite early, allowing them to end their travel for the day. Other days, however, they would search for hours, only to set up camp as darkness fell. Jon despised those long days. By the time they finally found a place to rest, everything felt rushed. Setting up tents and preparing meals became a frantic race against the fading light. Even the sleep on those nights left him feeling drained. He noticed that on those nights, he dreamed less, and he missed the comforting presence of Rhaenys. Waking up without seeing or speaking to her added to his frustration, and it often took him hours to shake off the bad mood that followed. On those days, he struggled to warg, as if some unseen weight troubled his mind. But on the nights when he did dream of Rhaenys, he woke up feeling lighter and more refreshed. His connection to warging seemed to flow more easily, and he found he could accomplish more with it. Just a day ago, he and Jojen had practiced warging into a bird. The night before that, he had spent hours wandering through the caves beneath Dragonmont with Rhaenys, exploring the legacy of their ancestors. When Jojen suggested they try reaching out to a bird, Jon was skeptical. "How will we see them if they're so far away?" he asked. "We reach out, Jon. The book said it can be done. We don't need to see it with anything other than our third eye," Jojen explained. "Our what?" Jon inquired, confusion etched on his face. "Our mind," Jojen clarified, laughter bubbling up from Loras. Despite his doubts, Jon decided to give it a try. It took him longer than usual to focus, but eventually, he found a goal. With a mental image of the volcano in his mind, he felt himself slipping inside the bird's consciousness. He could see them in the air, lots of them. Picking one out, he reached out, and it welcomed him. The connection felt different, though, looser, almost like a fishing line resting in the water. He sensed that if he pulled on it too hard, he might lose it, so he let it stay as it was. Flying over and gazing at the castle, he realized that what he saw was both familiar and different from his dreams with Rhaenys. It seemed darker, more foreboding. As he looked at the banners and flags, he understood why. The stag didn't belong here. He looked down at the men walking along his family's towers and parapets, and without even thinking, he felt the gull release its bowels, watching as the contents landed directly on a stag banner. "Jon?" Jojen asked as he opened his eyes. "It worked," Jon said, smiling. "Jon, your nose," Loras said, handing him a piece of cloth to wipe away the blood. "Are you all right?" I feel fine." "It worked, Loras." "Jojen, it worked." "It did." "Where did you go?" Jojen asked. "Dragonstone." For the rest of the day, Jon endured a terrible headache. He wondered if it was due to his age, his strength, or if he simply needed more practice to warg without experiencing pain. Or was this the price for pushing beyond his limits? He waited a couple of days before attempting to warg again, hoping for a smoother experience, which led to another discovery. "Are you sure, Jon?" Loras asked, concern etched on his face. "It'll be fine. Besides, if it hurts again, I'll know, won't I?" "All right, just be careful," Loras said, smiling at his friend's determination. Reaching out, he found himself once again over Dragonstone. As he scanned for gulls to warg into, he noticed something strange. A single gull stood out, almost brighter than the others. Jon reached for it, preparing to initiate the connection, only to find the door already open. When he entered, he realized why. This was a place he'd been before. This was the same gull. This time, the bond felt even tighter. The connection Jon felt while warging into the gull was not as tight as it could be with an animal he was closer to, but it was still stronger than before. He was so thrilled by this discovery that he lingered longer within the gull's mind. It wasn't until he landed on a rocky outcrop that he finally broke the connection. When he opened his eyes, he saw Loras looking at him with concern. To his relief, there was no blood trickling from his nose this time. He quickly explained his experience to Jojen, but they struggled to make sense of it. Later that day, although he still had a headache, it was much less severe than the one he'd experienced before. About a week and a half into their journey, a group of Stark men joined them. Jon recognized Jory, Alan, and Will among them and felt a wave of happiness at their arrival. However, he was surprised they had come to meet them. As the men drew closer, he noticed the relief in their eyes and began to wonder if something had happened. Just then, Ghost decided to make his entrance. Once the horses calmed down and the men realized the wolf was with Jon, the questions began. "Is that a dire wolf?" Alan asked. It's Ghost." "He's harmless, aren't you, fella?" Jon replied, trying to dismiss the snickers from behind him. "Yeah, harmless," Loras snorted. "Lord Jaime, Lord Stark sent us to escort you to Winterfell." "We expected you earlier," Jory said. "We stopped in Last Hearth for a day and got caught in a storm, so we delayed our travel," Jon explained. "No other problems, my lord?" Jory asked. "No, it was uneventful," Jaime answered. "Snow, good to see you, lad," Jory said, smiling at Jon. "You too, Jory. Are you faring well?" Jon asked. "I am." "You look well, too, lad," Jory replied, and Jon nodded in agreement. Once they joined the group, they continued their journey for the rest of the day. They were no more than 3 days out, and when they set up camp that night, Jory brought Jon up to speed on everything he had missed while he was away. He told Jon about his new brother and shared news about Arya and Sansa. When pressed about Robb, Jon noticed the look that crossed Jory's and Alan's faces but decided not to say much. "You'll be looking forward to seeing your father again, no doubt," Jory remarked. Jon nodded, while Loras and Jaime shifted uncomfortably. Mira and Jojen offered him reassuring smiles. I'm looking forward to seeing them all, Jory," Jon replied, smiling back and receiving a warm grin in return. That night, as Jon prepared for bed, a wave of worry washed over him. He pondered how things would unfold once he returned to Winterfell. How would his uncle react? What about his wife? He was excited to reunite with his siblings, though. As he took the dragon egg out of the chest and settled back in bed, he hoped to connect with them as well as he did with Rhaenys. Thoughts of his sister filled his mind as he drifted off to sleep, wishing to meet her in his dreams once again. In his dream, he found her walking by shimmering pools in a vibrant garden. She beckoned him to join her as she sat down and dipped her feet in the cool water. Rhaenys had blossomed into a poised and beautiful young lady. Her long, dark hair cascaded over her bare shoulders, perfectly contrasting her deep skin tone. Her purple eyes, dark and mysterious, always sparkled with warmth and friendliness whenever she saw him. As he settled beside her, he noticed the contented smile gracing her face. She looked at peace, happy, and he felt grateful for that. When he had found her again, she expressed her loneliness. "You left me alone, Jon," she said softly. "With no one to talk to. Mother and father and Egg are gone. It was just me, and then you left too." He had promised never to leave her alone again, and so far, he had managed to keep that vow. "Where are we, Ray?" "The Water Gardens. Mother and father brought me here once. Balerion and I played over there in the water, though he didn't like being splashed," Rhaenys said, laughter dancing in her voice. "We could have come here often, then?" Jon asked. "We could, Jon. You, me, Egg, Dany, Vis, all of us playing together. Do you think your uncles would have liked me?" Jay asked hesitantly. "I like you, so they would have to, or else I wouldn't like them," Rhaenys replied with a grin. Jay nodded, comforted by her words. They lingered in that moment, sharing laughter and playful banter. Suddenly, Jay leaped into the water, pulling Rhaenys in after him. Her retaliation was swift and relentless, splashing him until he could barely catch his breath. Finally, she relented. "Now see what happens," she said, her tone stern, before bursting into laughter. Jay cherished these parts of the dream, but as dark clouds began to gather, he felt a familiar sense of dread. Yet, as always, Rhaenys was right there beside him, her hand in his, as they waited for the sky to darken completely and the visions to unfold. In his dream, he witnessed a large dog protecting a baby dragon while people around it poked with pointed sticks. He saw a creature with the body of a lion and a scorpion's tail, ensnared in a net, blinded by a shining star. A snake lay crumbled and broken beneath a large rock, while a wolf broke free from the chains that bound it. Amidst the chaos, his sister looked at him and smiled, a dragon soaring freely in the sky above them. But then, the hand that held his began to fade away. When he turned to find Rhaenys, he found himself alone, accompanied only by a white wolf, until the dragon landed nearby, gazing at him with dark purple eyes. He woke up in a cold sweat, trying to make sense of the visions he had just experienced. Grabbing the small notebook he used for notes, he quickly jotted down everything he could remember, marking the details of where and when it had all occurred. The book contained other dreams too, one from the wall, another from Last Hearth, and a few from his journey on the road. Some dreams he had deciphered, others remained a mystery. But from his conversations with Jojen, he understood that these dreams were significant. Rhaenys had told him the same, though he couldn't grasp why they were so important. With a sense of purpose, he began to dress. Jory quickly broke his fast with the others before sending Alan and Will on to Winterfell to announce their arrival the next day. With a sense of anticipation, he looked forward to being in a room again, somewhere safe and warm. He longed to read his father's letters, which he had only glanced at briefly when his uncle handed them to him. The thought of them being damaged or lost had compelled him to keep them tied and locked away at the bottom of his chest. They were far too precious to risk during travel. "I can't wait to spar again," Loras said, pulling Jon from his thoughts. Me too," Jon replied as they prepared for the final leg of their journey. The rest of the day and the night passed quickly. They rode on, and Ghost gazed longingly at the wolfswood. Jon reassured him that he would be allowed there soon, which seemed to keep the dire wolf content for now. The following day, as they crested a hill, Jon caught sight of it for the first time in years. In the distance, it stood proudly. "Winterfell," Jon whispered softly.